Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're so glad to have you join us here today. Before we get started, I do have some housekeeping announcements. I'd love to tell you about some upcoming webinars we have. On Wednesday, September 24th, we'll be looking at the Work Futures Initiative, Lessons Learned from the Sandbox Conversations and Next Steps with Christina Banks, PhD, and the California Labor Lab. And then next Tuesday, October 14th, we'll be having a presentation on evaluating degreaser VOC exposure in auto shops using air sampling and biomarkers with Diana Caballos, PhD, MS, CIH, and the University of Washington Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences. Also next month on Wednesday, October 22nd, we'll have a presentation on swine processing and worker health, results from the Pulse study with Carissa Harris, PhD, CPE. For more, you can visit us online at coeh@berkeley.edu/webinars. And I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat. And on behalf of education and research centers throughout the country, it is my pleasure to present the Industrial Hygiene webinar series. This is a collaborative effort on behalf of each ERC's continuing education program and aspires to provide access to research supported through NIOSH ERC programs. Today's webinar, The Trust Decoder, Trust in Industrial Hygiene, is presented by Breysse Cox, MA, PhD, in the University of Washington Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences. You are going to be muted during this presentation, so if you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into the online Q&A. We'll be saving time at the end of the presentation to address as many questions as possible. We also have the chat open, so feel free to use it to participate, join in the conversation, say hello to your colleagues, etc. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health YouTube page within 5 business days. And all participants who log in today with their registration email for the full live presentation will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the evaluation form. That'll qualify you for a certificate of completion with 1 continuing education contact hour. Once the evaluation is completed, you'll be able to access and print your certificate. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's presenter, Dr. Breysse Cox. Dr. Breysse Cox has over 25 years of transformational change technology projects with Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and healthcare. This includes leadership positions in IT, operations, customer service, product management, and marketing. Most recently, she worked for UW Facilities Organization, leading business intelligence initiatives to preserve the UW property and space legacies. Consistently recognized for excellence, she was chosen in 2008 as the recipient of Women in Technology International Leadership Award for leadership and support of women in IT. Molly has a PhD in leadership and change from Antioch University. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your information. We're really looking forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you so much for the great introduction, Michelle. And I won't spend any time. There's just a few of those crib notes up front. I do want to highlight my career at the University of Washington as not only as an alumni, it's also having worked at the Center for Leadership and Strategic Thinking in the Foster School of Business for 8 years. And I've been with the Occupational Safety and Health Continuing Education teaching courses since 2017, and now I work full-time for the group. And in the short run, I'm filling in for Nancy Simcox as the interim director while she's out on a leave. So today we're going to talk about a subject that is near and dear to me, and it's really about trust. And so fundamentally, in the description of the course for today, I talk about how it's a foundation for successful hygiene, industrial hygiene programs and professionals. There's a deep connection around trust and open communication, accurate data, information and collection, and effective controlling of implementations. So really what trust is about is creating a shared commitment to protect our workers today. So as we get started, I want to ask you and invite you into the chat session. And I have 2 questions for you. Let's do the first one now. And what I'd like you to do is just put into chat if your tendency to trust others is high, medium, or low. In the chat session, how would you describe your tendency to trust others? High, medium, or low? I'm going to open the chat.
Looks like we're getting a lot of medium responses.
Any lows?
Yes, we do have a few lows, a couple highs. It looks like predominantly mediums. Some depends.
It depends. Good. I like that. All right. Okay. Highs, mediums. All right. Well, let's go on to the second question. And this is on the Likert scale, 1 to 5. 1 is strongly disagree. 2 is disagree. 3 is neither. 4 is agree. And 5 is strongly agree. So answer this question. Trusting another person is not difficult for me.
Reading a lot of 3s and 4s, some 2s, a couple 5s. Some more 3s, 4, 3. Thank you everyone for putting in your answer. We got another 2.
So I'm using this technique to help you engage and start to think about the topic of trust. So we're entering the beginning of the conversation today, mostly me talking, and I'm asking you to reflect on trust. There's a couple of things that are interesting. One is that when we think about trust, very often we think about the degree to which we trust somebody else. And when someone else has violated the trust for us is very often what's foremost in mind. And I'll also tell you confidentially, when you're in occupational health and safety, most of us have a tendency to trust people from a very high and medium perspective. So today, what we're going to go through is the 4 components of trust. Why is trust essential for fostering positive health and safety behavior engagement, and how to enhance your effectiveness by fostering and applying trust building strategies. So I'm going to go over why is trust essential? What is trust? 5 reasons why trust is important. I'm going to share with you the definition of trust. We're going to talk about 2 types of trust, which are really about bringing our whole person to the party when it comes to trusting others. And then what are the 4 things that comprise trust? And then why is it foundational, and how do you connect it to the work that you're doing in IH? So here's the secret, which is it's critical for industrial hygiene because trust is the underpinning of all effectiveness of every workplace health and safety program and efforts. And it's trust across the board. Leaders, managers, workers, everybody needs to operate with high trust. So it's the foundation. And it's based on a lot of different components that we're going to talk about a little bit more today around information and cooperation, why it's important to implement hazard controls effectively, and then what makes it possible. So here's a way of thinking about trust. What even is it? So trust is transactional. Trust is reciprocal. Trust is a process, and it can be learned. So when we think about trust being transactional, it's important to understand that very often when we're in a trusting relationship, we talk about why we trust, that it's earned and or it's contingent on something, but that's not sufficient. We also need to understand that trust is reciprocal, that it's based on mutual exchange, it's based on giving and receiving, and it's a self-reinforcing loop. And trust is a process. It takes place over time and it needs to be invested in. And the most important part, trust can be learned. That's what we're here for today. Let's learn a little bit more about trust. So here are 5 reasons why trust is important to you in industrial hygiene. These are really specific reasons. One is that trust promotes honest reporting. If I, as a worker, do not believe the data and the information that you're sharing with me is honest, then anything else you want me to do is going to be very difficult. As an industrial hygienist, when you're doing your own research and you're reporting on information, it's important for others to believe that the information that you're sharing with them is really accurate and truthful. Trust encourages compliance and participation. So employees are going to be more willing to follow health and safety professionals as long as they believe that the compliance and participation are encouraged for the right reasons and that I trust it. And then trust supports accurate exposure assessment. So it enables the cooperation during the sampling, during the interviews, and without it, data is going to be incomplete, might be misleading, and it might be a missing or compromising risk. It also builds the credibility for you as an IH professional. So when you're trusted, your recommendations carry more weight. And it's not just for workers, it's also for leaders, and it's also for professionals who are also industrial hygienists. And then finally, it fosters a culture of prevention. We talk a lot about a culture in the world today around prevention and safety. And when you're fostering a culture of prevention and trust is involved, it empowers workers to be open, to share their concerns early, to make suggestions, and to work collaboratively. So these are 5 very specific, very easily understood reasons about why trust is important in the industrial hygiene world. So what is the definition of trust? So trust is the willingness of someone to be vulnerable to the actions of somebody else. Basically, it's based on the expectations that others will perform particular action that is important to the truster, to me, regardless of my ability to monitor and control that other person. In other words, I'm willing to be vulnerable to you until you give me a reason otherwise. And now we're getting into the meat of the conversation today, which is really about what the heck is trust. So I'm going to give you the 4 areas or components of trust and how they're comprised. This is going to feel like a lot of information. And if one thing sticks with you, then we've hit a home run today. But we're going to go through what the first and most important area of trust to start with, which is our propensity. What are we born with? And then we're going to talk about the 3 other components of competence, benevolence, and integrity, and why these are important when you think about trust as a whole package. Right now, I'm going to share with you 2 types of trust. When I did my research on trust, I discovered that at the time in 2019, there were 32 different types of trust. That gives you an idea of how complex it is and how it can often be situationally appropriate. So today what I'm going to do is help you understand that there's a distinction between cognitive and affective trust when it comes to our willingness to trust people. It's called interpersonal trust happening between 2 folks. So now we're going to share the fact that trust has both how we think and how we feel. So cognitive trust is a type of trust that's based on a rational assessment of the other person. And the kinds of things that we care about when we think about trust are, is that person reliable? Are they competent? And do they operate with integrity? So this is the confidence that you believe someone has the knowledge and the skills and the consistency to do what they say they'll do. So do I think you're trustworthy? So in health and safety contexts, it's essentials because workers need to trust that managers, supervisors, and professionals know what they're doing, that they're transparent, and that they base decisions on sound evidence. So that's one half of the equation when we think about interpersonal trust. It's how do we think? So now let's go to the other half, which is all about how we feel. And so effective trust grows out of emotional closeness. It's about mutual concern and do we care about somebody else? So it's based on confidence because we have the relationship built with an individual. And it's not just because we think they're competent or reliable, it's because we care and that we have a bond. It's based on other people's needs and also our social relationships. So in health and safety settings, effective trust encourages us to speak up about hazards, to engage, and to report concerns because we think our leaders are genuinely going to care. So the key in the distinction about interpersonal trust being both cognitive and effective is to be able to see yourself, and are you bringing both? Are you bringing both your head and your heart? Or are you routing your heart through your head? So now let's go further into trust and keep in mind that trust is grounded in both how we think and we feel. And so when cognitive trust arising allows us to choose based on rational evaluation, while effective stems from how do we feel. So bring both of those into the room when you think about other people in your industrial hygiene profession, and also how do others see you. So let's go into one of the four areas of trust. We're going to start with the propensity, and this is about what are your tendencies toward trusting others. So let's circle back to that first couple of questions that I asked you. And it was really around reflecting your tendencies to trust other people, and high, medium, or low. So our propensity to trust is our natural willingness, regardless of our social relationships or any other specific information. So we're typically born with our propensity. It comes from how we're raised in our family of origin. And very often we don't change our propensity to trust others. And so when you're in the workplace, it's easy to see the folks who have a tendency to trust quickly, easily. That's most often due to the propensity that they were born with and carried forward. It's also can be on the low end of the scale. So much like I highlighted in occupational health and safety, the professionals who come and get an education, who do continuing education, very often come in with a high propensity. And then there are places where there are low propensities. And a lot of the worker groups that you engage with on a regular basis are coming into the workplace with a low tendency to trust others. And so one of the challenges you're going to face is that trust has already started, whether you realize it or not. And so what's important to know is that as an employee, a worker, they can't see the things that are very often risky to them. And so they rely on IH experts. And their propensity to trust may make a worker more likely to follow than could be compliance towards protective measures and report concerns, or go in the opposite direction. So the challenge you face is understanding that somebody's propensity to trust may already start out low. And so how can you think about building trust in a manner that is positive and fosters engagement? And we're going to do that when we talk about the three other areas of trust. Keep in mind that managers and supervisors also have a propensity to trust you as a professional. And I was recently working with some first responders who were sharing a lot about how they were feeling about the industrial hygienists that they were working with. So I can tell you that I know on behalf of industrial hygiene that without having trust, without the supervisors and the managers and workers trusting you, that it's likely that your recommendations can be dismissed and that policies may not be followed. And it's less about whether they trust you as an individual, and it's more about whether their propensity to trust industrial hygienists is high, medium, or low. And then there's the big marker in industrial hygiene work, and it has to do with workers and data. And I'll tell you, this is another hill you're going to climb because while you yourself may have a higher or medium propensity, others may not. And so when there is skepticism in the workplace by the workers and the leadership around data and the importance of risks and risk assessment, you already have an area that you have to focus on right out of the gate. So keep in mind that when you're thinking about what's going on in the workplace, you might want to take into account how are you going to approach the people who come in skeptical. So when trust is high, exposure controls are followed and health is protected. When it's low, even your best plans may fail. And keep in mind that when there is a higher percentage of workers that you're trying to influence that have a low propensity to trust, that the challenges you face become even greater because they influence each other. Let's go into the other areas of trust that are not due to your propensity. And the first one is about your competency. In other words, do you know what you're doing? This is what other people are asking themselves. So the competency to trust is really about an individual's expertise and having a mastery of the domain that they are an expert in. And so one of the earliest ways we increase or form trust in industrial hygiene is when others perceive you as being an expert and they have confidence in your expertise. So here are the things to think about in order to foster confidence in your expertise. So do you have the technical expertise to identify and assess hazards? Chemical, noise, biohazards. So how do you share that? It isn't enough to go in and bring your resume, but part of the way we share our expertise is in our narratives and in the stories that we tell. So keep in mind that this is, again, appealing to the affective or the feeling side of trust, which is making a personal connection. And then do you apply the right methods for monitoring, evaluating, and controlling measures? Because if you're not applying the right methods, then in the future, there's always going to be some suspicion about your ability. And do you stay up to date with scientific, regulatory, and best practices in your fields? So these are all examples of ways that you can demonstrate your competency in industrial hygiene and foster the confidence that others believe that you do know what you're doing. So when your competence is clear Employees feel confident in the recommendations and that you are, in fact, making recommendations that are both sound and protective. Now we're getting into, so if you think about competence, it's very much about a cognitive, a learned expertise, and it's often fostered by experience. Here's another side of the coin, which is about benevolence. And benevolence asks if, do you have my best interests at heart? So this is the affective side of trust. So benevolence is the degree to which you as a truster are willing to be good to the trustee. In other words, to refer to their intentions to act as giving them the benefit of the doubt and without any personal profits or motives. Do you give others the benefit of the doubt? It's one of the guiding principles that's really important when working in a team in order to foster trust early and fast. We're going to get to another reason why benevolence is mission critical, but fundamentally it's about believing in the goodwill of others. I've seen more than one scenario in the workplace where the person who is the expert is in a scenario that also is with the person who is really high in the benevolence. And the people that get followed up to the top of the mountain are the people who are benevolent. You may or may not, you cannot live alone by being the expert. So trust grows when workers believe that you're focused on protecting their health and safety, that it's not just about compliance and money. So do you listen to employee concerns? When I teach development courses, we work very early on this idea of listening. And I'll ask folks to self-rate themselves. In many, if not most cases, people rate themselves as high as listening, high in listening. Here's the question I have for you. If you rate yourself as a medium or high in practicing listening, how do you know? How do you know you're listening? And so when you listen to employee concerns, the flip side isn't just intake, it's also confirming. Do you advocate for controls even if it costs more? So is it about doing something because you can afford it or not? And then do you design solutions that protect both short and long-term health? So when the people around us perceive that as a professional that you care, cooperation increases. So caring is very important. Keep in mind that I'm going to make another connection to this in just a moment, because benevolence is really about creating safety on steroids. And now we're going to go to the fourth component, and it's about integrity. And this is about, do you do what's right even when it's hard? So this is about the perception others have of your honesty. And how well do they see you adhering to being honest and fair? One of the things that's interesting about trust is that when it comes to competence, we can increase our competency and we can also practice more benevolence. When we have issues of integrity, it's a very different story. And building trust, and especially losing trust when it's around integrity, requires a whole different set of actions and engagement. So it's mission critical to understand how important trust and integrity are, because when they are impacted, remedying it is just not trivial. So integrity means being honest, being transparent, and being consistent. That transparency thing comes up a lot in your profession. And keep in mind that one of the things that's interesting about transparency is that in order for someone to be transparent, it requires that they trust others. And it also, in being transparent, it actually increases the trust others have of you. So transparency is one of those areas that is super important. As an IH professional, if I don't think you're telling me the whole story, then I'm going to have an issue with your transparency. Or if I believe you're holding back, or if I believe you're not sharing the full story. So keep in mind that integrity means reporting findings even if the results are uncomfortable. Following through on commitments. So if you say you're going to fix something or if you're going to review something, you absolutely need to follow through. It's also called a closed feedback loop. So asking for input and then doing nothing goes a long way for people not trusting that you're going to be reliable. Do you uphold ethical standards even when you're under pressure? And this is the big one because there's a lot of places today and everything from agriculture, manufacturing, to warehouse work, where it's about productivity, it's about timing, and it's very difficult to hold up ethical standards when there's other key things at play, like level of production and the dollars. So keep in mind that integrity fosters lasting trust and creates a workplace culture that values safety and well-being. So again, that the word culture comes in here. Integrity has a huge role in that. So now let's talk a little bit about why trust is foundational to you as an industrial hygiene. And why building trust is not optional. So trust is what transforms the workplace from compliance and obligation to a shared commitment to worker health. If you don't have trust, even the best technical solutions will fail. It doesn't matter how good a solution is if people are not going to follow. Trust affects everybody. Every person in the workplace is impacted by it. This is what's most interesting to me. While trust is central to effective teams, organizations, and leaders, many of us are unaware of how trust forms, what it's made of, or where it begins. And if you don't pay attention to that, that gap can lead to serious consequences in the workplace. Today is just a little bit of a soundbite. If you think about 32 different types of trust, then what is it made of and where it begins starts to take on a different life. And so while trust is comprised of those four components, propensity, competence, benevolence, and integrity, they all look different. And if you mistake one for the other, or you believe you're being trustworthy and ignoring one, then you're going to have a gap. So this is what drove me into the work that I am doing, which is having grown up in a family with educators and industrial hygienists. I knew what was going on in occupational health and safety and exposure, and I knew that I was never going to pass an organic chemistry class. I myself went into business and technology, and I took a completely different route until I realized that in the workplace, that there were two different kinds of safety: my health and well-being, and then how did I feel? And so what I discovered is that there's a term in the workplace, and it's about, do others give me the benefit of the doubt? And Amy Edmondson coined the term psychological safety. She introduced this to describe that individuals need to have a sense of confidence that the team is not going to embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up, and that it is in fact safe to take risks and make mistakes. The light came on for me, which is when people don't feel safe in the workplace, they're not going to do their best. When people don't feel safe to speak up and to share where their concerns are, then it creates a domino effect for you as an IH. And then the other part of this is, do I trust? Do I give others the benefit of the doubt? So what's interesting is that for me, in trusting others, I give them the benefit of the doubt or not. However, when everyone else gives me the benefit of the doubt, I now feel safe. So trust, specifically benevolence, is mission critical in order for others to feel safe in the workplace. And Edmondson, who is very famous for the work she's doing in psychological safety, she argues that trust is a prerequisite and it's a necessary condition to increase people feeling safe in the workplace. So I'm not going to feel safe if others aren't benevolent towards me, and that is trust. So I'm building the case for why increasing trust is important. So please keep in mind that a lack of trust in IH is costly. It reduces employee cooperation when it comes to exposure assessments, monitoring, and control implementation. Research has been done on all this. It undermines relationships between you and the workers and management. And it can lead to hidden costs, underreporting, not reporting near misses, misusing PPE, not donning it or doffing it correctly, and or one of my all-time favorite topics, resistance to change, which impacts everybody and impacts the outcomes and operational performance. So to be effective, you must build on trust. Trust in the process, in the professionals, and in the shared goal of protecting workers. So how can you do that? Here are some strategies. Each one of these we could go deeper into. Unfortunately, we do not have the time. But you need to demonstrate that you're competent and you need to be transparent. I worked with a gentleman in a class who shared with me that he is transparent, that when he feels something, he shows it. When he's happy, and when he's angry. And showing your emotions is not what it means to be transparent. Being transparent means that people understand your motives and believe the information and what you're revealing to be true. Build relationships. I've worked in a lot of groups. I've been in a lot of classes where I get a leader who tells me that, the people side, they're only doing it because they have to, that their preference is that feelings should never enter the workplace. When a leader, a worker, or an IH shares that they don't need to know other people, what they're doing is telling others that they don't need to feel safe in the workplace because you're only bringing a part of yourself. Model integrity and be consistent about it. Get workers to participate. Ask them in, get feedback, understand what they're experiencing. I had an amazing success story with someone who was the IH on a farm, and they were sharing that they had a really difficult time getting the workers to wear boots. And by going out and seeing where they were working and what was going on and transpiring, she was able to ask them more about their footwear, only to discover that it was expensive footwear. And so when the farm started to offer paying for the right footwear, compliance shot up and they didn't have any more issues. Had they not asked those workers to participate in solving the problem, they may not have solved it as quickly as they did. Foster people feeling safe in the workplace. I can't make myself feel safe, but I can make other people feel, I can help others feel safe. And then more importantly, lead by example. Be consistent. Look for areas where you're congruent. And keep in mind, human behavior is not binary. It's not that I'm competent, it's not that I'm benevolent. Ask yourself, when are you showing competence and when aren't you? What might be the cases when you aren't being benevolent? So always look for the strengths and where the opportunities are, and in doing so, be transparent about it. That's what leading by example looks like. So with that, I'd like to thank you for coming to today's dialogue on trust. And I hope you learned one thing, and I hope that maybe there was a little part of today's conversation that made you uncomfortable. So feel free to go ahead and ask any question you'd like to. Oh, thank you.
Excellent. Oh, thank you so much. What an excellent presentation. I know I have a few questions of my own, but for everyone in the audience, you're welcome to enter your questions into the Q&A, and I'm happy to ask them to our wonderful presenter for today. One of the first questions or kind of thoughts that came up for me is around getting workers to participate, and just something that I've observed and where people might invite stakeholders to participate, get that feedback, and then not necessarily implementing or following up on the information they received from workers. And I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on that and how that might relate to trust, and how to rework that so that workers want to continue to participate.
An age-old piece of feedback I get. Why are we doing another strategy session? Why are we coming together? And it has everything to do with ensuring you know what you get out of the session, meaning active listening throughout the day. Is this what you're asking? Is this what your perspective is? And building on it. And even more important is, what are you going to do about things, and having a closed feedback loop. So even if you're not going to address something, you got to come back and say, this was a great idea, the timing isn't right, or this is by design, because when you give dead air, then that decreases trust. Remember, integrity is about giving the message even when it's an unpleasant one.
Thank you so much. We do have another question. How could you work trust into a root cause analysis when investigating injuries or illness?
Oh, I love putting trust into root cause analysis, because a key area of root cause analysis is the integrity of the data and the information, and the process to which you get it. So people have to trust the process, so it's being transparent, it's involving folks in the participation early on, and then it's also ensuring that you understand the difference between critical thinking and criticizing. And so critical thinking is a competency. However, if you go too far and you criticize, somebody isn't going to feel safe. And so that's an example of understanding the distinction and ensuring your employing the idea of the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you. And again, we do have plenty of time, so if you have questions, please do feel free to enter them into the Q&A. We'll make sure to address them. Another question, someone, or I guess it's an observation, but leading to a question, someone might have trust in a person as an individual, but not necessarily an institution. Can you speak a little bit to kind of that dichotomy between trust in an individual, trust in an institution, and how to restore trust if you are an individual working at an institution?
I think what I'm hearing you ask, what's the difference between the institutional trust and the trust I might have of somebody, for example, who works in the institution. I might trust them, however, I might not trust the company, the whatever. So institutional trust is about culture. And one of the things that I discovered myself was that the things that I was trying to change were related to culture. And so understanding what you're trying to change and what you're trying to institute is a part of building trust and mapping the trusting components to that. So when I'm changing culture, I'm building learning organizations and building trust into that. So it's really being conscientious and understanding, am I trying to change a task? Am I trying to change a system? Or am I trying to change the culture? And trust looks very different in each three of those scenarios.
Thank you so much. And I think this conversation is really important, especially as we look at, unfortunately there is a large mistrust of institutions. And, I think towards the dismantling of a lot of our, CDC, NIOSH, funding opportunities, et cetera, and just the kind of the public growing sentiment of mistrust in some of these situations. And then also as an individual in health and safety wanting to restore trust and the people that I talk to on a daily basis, like, I trust you, I know that you work there, I believe that you are doing everything that you can to support. So I think it's a really important point in that the individual, the institution, and restoring trust. And I just appreciate all of the tools, the strategies, the tenets of trust that you shared with us today. um, that was just kind of a comment, but I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
Well, I think we are, in fact, facing unprecedented times, certainly for the generations that are around today, around trust. And I also know that what research will tell you is that when the trust of institutions is broken, that remedying that is no small feat, and that there's likely to be an impact that trails us for years and years and years. And the one way that we can combat it is to actually understand technically what is trust, what are the human competencies that foster trust, and to be more intentional about it. What is happening in the earlier educations and in high school education is our children, our grandchildren are getting educated on human competencies and emotional regulation and integrity. And as a result, when they come into the workplace, they're going to have a different level of understanding and a different level of maturity. So not only are we dealing today with what's happening institutionally, but we're also going to bring generations into the workforce that have a better way of coping and dealing with the world. So just today, even knowing that trust is comprised of four components, and if you're in the workplace and you're working on a project and you're sensing that someone doesn't trust you, hopefully you'll ask yourself what trust is at stake. So if what's at stake is that the person doesn't feel safe contributing, the person doesn't feel safe speaking up, what can you do? And there's you may not be able to change the culture, but you can certainly change the environment to which you work in every day.
Thank you so much. It's really great to hear that all these competencies are really being brought into the educational space. It's so important. I know I've definitely am thinking through some projects and, oh, in what ways am I demonstrating these propensities for trust in this scenario? Another question from our audience: have you ever seen companies build teams around building trust throughout a company?
Oh, absolutely. I worked for one, and trust was a forefront. They talked about it. When trust was broken, they were open and honest. And then they were very transparent. You can't be perfect. Nothing is either fully on or fully off, but it is a cultural component. And you have to be able to understand what does it look like and what does it look like when it isn't happening. So yes, it does happen. Cultural trust is top down. Absolutely, you require shareholders, stakeholders, all of the board of directors. If you do not have a mature board of directors that has an appreciation for it, you can see a lot of things happen in a way that are either going to go on the good side or not so good side. And you're seeing some major companies today think more heavily and addressing trust front and center.
Thank you so much. I'm curious if you have an example of a group that maybe worked together to restore trust. I mean, you don't have to divulge any personal information or about the company or the group, but just curious if you have an example of strategies that you've seen applied that worked well in practice.
Yeah, I was a part of a group and was helping them with change management where they had an unprecedented product failure. And their first intention was to not address it, but to fix it. And so by bringing the team together and creating different subgroups based on people's interest, so everyone had a voice, it created categories of the things that were important, and the teams were able to break down what are the ways we can address it. What are the types of things that the categories of trust that were involved? And then they were open and honest. And they shifted the scenario from one where they were abject failing to one of where we made a mistake and we're going to fix it. And the team themselves came out of it in a way where now they're proponents of, stronger collaboration and shifting from resistance to fostering.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I can think of a few different examples in my own experience where, if a mistake is made, sometimes it's hard to own that, oh, you know what, a mistake is made. But when you do, the amount of trust that you can get and, oh, you know what, I got that wrong. This is what I'm going to do to fix it, can really repair the relationship.
Rochelle, thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah. I'm curious for folks who want to learn more, who we're just scratching the surface here. This is an incredibly rich conversation, an incredibly rich area of research, and so important to everything that everyone on this call does. I'm curious if you have any research or resources that you'd like to point us to or share with the group.
Yeah, we're getting ready to launch a course that's intended to be one in a series of three called the Trust Decoder. And I will send the when it's ready to go and you can register, I'll send that information to you, Michelle, and you can share it with this audience, most likely February.
Excellent. Yes, and I'll make sure if you're on this to send out that information to everyone.
Thank you.
And we have another question. In your opinion, what is the influence of language barriers, for example, not communicating in the language of the majority, in hindering or helping trust?
Oh boy, that's huge. And I have been someone who's seen it myself. I used to use a lot of sports analogies, and I was managing a team of 150 people, of which probably 60% were international and English wasn't their first language. And nobody told me. Someone actually finally brought it up and they dawned on me. And so we started changing our process when we got together and we started shifting the opportunity to share and to think about how people might be different due to language. And even more important, it was raising awareness for the people in the room that not everybody thinks like we do. And it was an important revelation. And so this is where taking different perspectives and asking questions becomes a really important capability.
Thank you. This is kind of a follow-up on the communication aspect, but being transparent in some of the technical aspects of industrial hygiene, where do you see the limit is, and it might be difficult for people who aren't industrial hygienists to understand the technical aspect of it, or where there might not be a consensus in what is the topic at hand?
I have to be transparent and tell you that I have some opinions on this. Because I'm teaching people and I'm often told that I'm too technical. But I've also been through the business evolution and the technology evolution, and a certain amount of that is important. And the other part is my dad, as an industrial hygienist, would sit at the dinner table and tell us where he's going. He did some expert witness deposition, and he said, it doesn't matter if the other attorneys understand what I'm saying. If I get in a room of juries, I need them to understand. So he was adamant about the importance of being understood by folks everywhere and around you. So you need to build the competency in. You need to be able to both speak simply and plainly and you also have to be able to demonstrate that you've got a technical competency. So you've got both sides that you need to foster.
Yes, thank you so much. Do you have, I think we're getting about close on the questions, but I'm just curious if there's anything else that you'd like to share with our audience today before we close the webinar.
For me, I feel very fortunate. I've had a great career. I've spent 13 years at Nordstrom, 14 years at Microsoft. And what I learned was that I didn't get stuck very often, but when I did, I didn't know what to do. And that drove me to getting a master's in organizational psychology. And when I started my master's program, I wanted to know what's the one thing that I can do no matter what that will always be helpful. And that's where I learned it's about building trust. And then it started on the journey about what trust is. Imagine a world if we all understood more about trust and how it formed and what it looked like for us and our ability to be trusting of others. So here's a whole set of citations that are in the back of the presentation that are just a way to start. And don't hesitate to use artificial intelligence to ask for research. There's a lot in industrial hygiene and occupational health and safety. And it's not just about the organizations and the workplace, it's also about leadership. So remember, it's about building learning into what you do every day.
Well, thank you so, so much for this incredibly important conversation and presentation. And we really, really appreciate you sharing your words with us, your research. Thank you so much. And with that, thank you everyone who joined us today for the session. This recording will be made available, so we'll be sure to send out that recording link for you. And you can learn more and register for other upcoming webinars at coeh@berkeley.edu/about-CE. Thank you all again so much for being here. Thank you so much, Dr. Breysse Cox.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.